European leaders rule out sending troops to Ukraine after Macron's suggestion, as Russia warns of war with NATO.
Leaders across Europe have lined up to rule out putting troops on the ground in Ukraine after French President Emmanuel Macron announced he was open to the idea of sending soldiers to fight against Vladimir Putin's forces, as the Kremlin warned of the inevitability of a direct war with NATO if such. The war of words came as Russian forces expanded their takeover of a section on the eastern front line, further capitalizing on Ukraine's significant artillery disadvantage created by the depletion of Western supplies to the country over the last 6 months. Britain, Germany, the head of NATO and several other key allies of Kyiv announced they had no plans to send troops into the fight against Russian forces. There are no plans for UK troops to fight alongside the Ukrainian armed forces, the UK's Ministry of Defence told The Independent, in comments echoed by Italy, Poland, the Czech Republic, Sweden, and several other European states. NATO allies are providing unprecedented support to Ukraine. But there are no plans for NATO combat troops on the ground in Ukraine, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said. The comments came less than 24 hours after Mr. Macron, addressing reporters in Paris after a conference attended by 20 European leaders, said he could not rule out sending troops into Ukraine. "We will do everything needed so Russia cannot win the war," he told reporters. Asked if that included sending soldiers, a move that has been avoided out of fear of escalating the conflict, Mr. Macron responded, "There is no consensus to send, in an official manner, troops on the ground. But in terms of options, nothing can be ruled out." But German Chancellor Olaf Scholz suggested the discussions in Paris had reached a different conclusion. Once again, in a very good debate, it was discussed that what was agreed from the outset, among ourselves and with each other, also applies to the future, namely that there will be no ground troops, no soldiers on Ukrainian soil sent there by European countries or NATO states, Mr. Scholz said on the sidelines of an event back in Germany. A former French senior civil servant with knowledge of the talks later told The Independent that the majority of the leaders present in Paris were likely to have been surprised by Mr. Macron's comments. Most of the other heads of state and government were unaware that the French president was going to make statements along these lines, he said. France's own foreign minister, Stéphane Séjourné, sought to clarify Mr. Macron's comments on Tuesday afternoon, saying that soldiers could engage in acts of mine clearance, cyber defense and the production of weapons on site on Ukrainian territory. Some of its actions could require a presence on Ukrainian territory, without crossing the threshold of fighting, he said. Nothing should be ruled out. This was, and still is, the position today of the President of the Republic. John Foreman, a former defense attaché for the UK in Moscow and Kyiv, described Mr. Macron's comments as a distraction, adding that he was not surprised by the reaction of the French president's fellow NATO leaders. Macron doesn't speak on their behalf, and there has been no public or private messaging by any European leader that they are thinking of deploying troops to Ukraine, he told The Independent. There is a big say-do gap, so I didn't take this particularly seriously and am not surprised by the reaction of other leaders. He pointed to another announcement made by Mr. Macron, that France is now supporting initiatives to buy artillery shells for Ukraine from countries outside of Europe, as more significant.